If somebody were to ask me if I was surprised that the MOU with Iran or between Iran and the United States would fail, I would say absolutely not. Um, I saw the writing on the wall. I was listening to geopolitical analysts not aligned with, not mainstream news media. They'd say, yeah, it looks good. We're going to go to a final agreement. Okay, there were some tit for tat strikes against the U.S. against Iran and back and forth. But no, I think we're going to do that. Iran is normalizing with the GCC countries. And, I was like, yeah, I don't think so. And, I was just looking at certain events that I kind of want to talk about. First of all, the MOU between the United States and Iran, which I covered in a previous video, was signed on June 17th. And just the following week, on the 25th, Marco Rubio went over to, I think they were in Bahrain, to meet with the GCC countries, and they issued a joint statement. And that joint statement, which I will cover in a minute, had a lot of language in it that would lead me to believe that the GCC countries were absolutely not normalizing with Iran. And then the next day, we had the Israel, Lebanon, and US MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, signed, which basically allowed Israel to stay in Lebanon. Um, and that was on the 26th. And then on the 28th, there was an event in Iraq that did not seem to get all that much coverage. It was a anti-corruption raid in the Green Zone, which I believe is the zone where all the diplomats and government officials live. And that had some interesting implications. So I will also talk about that as well. But I want to first go back to the GCC's joint statement that they issued on the 25th, right after the signing of the Iran-US MOU. So first of all, they obviously agreed, they were happy that the MOU was signed, that there was going to be an ending of the hostilities and the strait was going to be opened, because they've had ships that have been stuck. They haven't been able to get their oil out. And so, that's okay, reasonable. It's my understanding that Qatar also worked with Pakistan to negotiate the MOU. And maybe even Saudi might have been involved as well. But the statement, so by these countries, which the GCC includes Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, UAE, Qatar, and Saudi. I think that's all of them. So, but it had a statement about broader Iran concerns, and it included Iran's ballistic missiles. Now, Iran's ballistic missiles are not discussed at all in the MOU between the US and Iran. And I am pretty sure Iran has not given up their ballistic missiles. I mean, they may agree to not enrich uranium any further and, you know, dilute, I like to use that word, dilute their existing uranium that's at higher levels. But I do not believe they are going to even contemplate giving up their ballistic missiles. That would leave them defenseless. The other thing that I found, obviously their drones, they said their drones were concerning. Well, Iran's clearly not going to give up their drones, but is the proxy support. And I'm assuming they're talking about what is referred to as the axis of resistance, which would be Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and the Iraqi militias in Iraq. So I thought, okay, that's interesting because those were not covered in the MOU. And back to well, there's that. Let me just continue. So the Strait of Hormuz, they wanted to stay free, and they rejected any tolls, fees, or attempts by Iran to assert control over the Strait of Hormuz. Okay. They welcomed Oman's initiative for a safe evacuation corridor for stranded seafarers. And so at the time when I read this, I thought, well, that's interesting because the MOU point 5, which I want to read real quick, um, granted, basically, it granted Iran the right to make arrangements using its best efforts for the safe passage of commercial vessels with no charge for 60 days from the Persian Gulf to the Sea of Oman and vice versa. So that is through the strait. And, it said traffic should immediately start. And regarding Oman, it says that Iran will conduct dialogue with Oman to define the future administration and maritime services in the Strait of Hormuz in discussion with other Persian Gulf littoral states. So nowhere in that point does it say Oman will arrange safe passage for vessels. So that statement, which was just a week after the Iran-US MOU, contravenes what the MOU said. And then the Lebanon agreement, the Lebanon issue is a little bit more confusing. And I will admit, the terms of the MOU between Iran and US are vague. And so it could leave room for interpretation, which that's been the US's position, that by Iran bombing the ships that have been going along the coast of Oman to try to avoid the Iranian side of the strait, that is in breach of the MOU. And I think that could be argued as well, but it wasn't intended that Oman would actually be making arrangements for safe passage. The MOU doesn't say that. It says that that'll be left to Iran. So, you can go. I don't know. I kind of agree with Iran's position more on this than the U.S. But it was clear in that joint statement from the GCC just a week later that that Oman intended to work with the United States to do exactly what they did by trying to sneak these ships out through the coast of closer to the coast of Oman versus going through the Iran part of the strait. So, I guess they were, I don't know, what were they doing? Testing to see what Iran was going to do. So, and the other statement, which let me go back to the GCC, they had a specific statement on Lebanon. They also, so on the Lebanon front, they reaffirmed commitment to sovereignty, security, stability. They backed U.S. mediated Israel-Lebanon talks, and they called for the disarmament of non-state armed groups, with the Lebanese state holding the monopoly of force. Now, the Iran-US MOU point 1 basically calls for Lebanon's territorial integrity and sovereignty to be respected, and that all force against each other, which is between the U.S. and Iran, was to end. But the activities in Lebanon, neither the U.S. nor Iran are directly involved with. So I don't know. Again, point 1 in the MOU was written very vague. And what the agreement between Lebanon and Israel did was basically give Israel the right by the government to be in Lebanon. So I think you could argue that Israel's presence in Lebanon doesn't breach their sovereignty. and territorial integrity since they have permission to be there. I doubt when they negotiated the MOU between Iran and the US, Iran was anticipating this. I'm sure the US was. So anyway, so back to the GCC statement. So basically what they support this agreement between between Lebanon and the United States. That's why, again, when people were saying, oh, they're normalizing with Iran, I was like, yeah, I don't think so. And this statement clearly, to me, indicates that they were not at any point. I do think that they were probably involved with the negotiation of the MOU to get it so that they could encourage Iran to settle it, and also to get Iran to stop bombing them, and which actually worked at the beginning of when the tension started to get reignited at the beginning, when Iran was bombing some of the vessels that were going through the Omani side. You didn't see, well, at least Iran didn't attack Qatar or UAE or Saudi. They were focused on Kuwait and Bahrain. Now, I mean, now they've basically gone after Qatar and I think the UAE. I'm not sure if they've gone after if they've bombed Saudi or not. Anyway, Gaza is an interesting. This is like such a BS statement. So they said they basically reaffirmed they support President Trump's comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict. I'm not sure what that comprehensive plan is, since Israel strikes Gaza every day and kills people. But the key elements include no forced displacement of Palestinians. Voluntary leavers can return. So I guess they just think it's okay for the ones that are there to just be killed because they're not addressing that. Demilitarization of armed groups, so obviously Hamas, and a civilian governance via an independent technocratic Palestinian committee. I'm really not sure what that means. Technocratic, what is that? I'm not sure to what they're referring. And they are members of the GCC members are participating in the Board of Peace, because we all know there's been so much peace. Anyway, so yeah, those are some of the key points that I wanted to just discuss. And again, that was just a week after the MOU between Iran and the US was signed. So to me, that is not a sign that this MOU is really going anywhere to a final deal between the Iran and the US. So I'm not going to talk about the Lebanon Israeli deal. That's kind of speaks for itself. It's clear the president of Lebanon is a US puppet. But I think what I really want to talk about more is what's going on in Iraq. As an American, I always oppose the Iraq war. I'm anti-war, so I pretty much every war I oppose. Not that, I mean, unless somebody attacks us directly on US soil, that's different. Iraq actually didn't attack us. They weren't involved in 9/11, and there was no evidence that they were. So for years, they just talked about, the killing and whatever. And then we never heard anything more about it. And so the prime minister of Iraq is in the United States right now, meeting with Trump, and it'll be interesting to see what their joint statement is. But there was this anti-corruption raid on June 28th. Just 2 weeks, not even 11 days after the Iran-US MOU was signed, and I was like, "There's something here," and I started trying to figure out, what was this? They were like, "Oh, it's anti-corruption." I'm like, "What does that mean?" So, and I had seen an article put out by RT, because I look at everybody, because I figure you got to look at everybody. I very rarely look at US news because I figure they're lying. to see what they said. And RT's position was, which is Russia Times, Russia, I guess Russia owns it, I don't know, was that it was targeted towards uh, government officials who were aligned with Iran. And I kind of had a sense that that was the case. So basically, there were different, I mean, it was in the middle of the night. It was like at 2 a.m., 2 to 3 a.m., and they detained a bunch of people. I think the reporting at that point was 38 to 47, and uh, a few of them had some connections with Iran. And then I also saw a statement that part of this raid, or the reason for the raid, had to do with the prime minister's upcoming meeting in Washington with Trump. And then I thought, oh, that's interesting. And then there was a statement made that his plan is to disarm all of the militias. And I thought, well, that's interesting too. And that was under the pressure from the United States. So what I started seeing is, and this was all during the ceasefire. This was before anything heated up back between the US and Iran. So what I started seeing is this pattern of the United States attempt to weaken the axis of resistance. Obviously, the Lebanon MOU between Israel and Lebanon, the purpose of that was to go after Hezbollah. And then I saw this in Iraq to go after anyone in the government, and then the militias that have any alignment with Iran. And then shortly thereafter, I started hearing about buildup on the Saudi-Yemen border. And I'm not sure if it was actually Saudi military or Saudi proxies. And then we started hearing about some conflicts between these anti-Houthi and Houthi, whatever, whoever's supporting them, groups in Yemen. And so I saw, well, and again, this is all while there's supposedly a ceasefire. Obviously, if I saw this, Iran saw this. So it seemed, so all of these things that were going on to me were evidence that the United States had no intention of fulfilling its side of the deal with the MOU with Iran. I mean, from the very beginning, there seems to be, when these ships were going out this strait through Oman, that was clearly at least trying to poke at Iran to see what they would do. Trump's, one of the provisions in the MOU called for unfreezing Iran's assets. And Trump's position after the fact was, we're not giving them any money. They're getting no U.S. money. And people being geopolitical analysts outside the United States were saying, well, they're going to arrange through the GCC countries to give them money, and then it'll be a loan, and the U.S. will pay them back, and they'll give them money that way. And I was like, okay, maybe. And I don't think that ever happened. And then looking at the GCC's joint statement, clearly, I don't think they were interested in giving Iran any money. And the MOU, then and Trump was saying, oh, well, they can buy, if we give them money, they have to buy U.S. agricultural products, which is contravenes what the MOU says, which basically, I think it's point 11, says that Iran can use the funds, basically, they are fully usable for payment to any ultimate beneficiary designated by the central bank of the Islamic Republic of Iran. So there was no restriction on how Iran was supposed to use its frozen assets that were returned to it. So, from the very beginning, and I'm guessing, from the very beginning, let me finish this statement, Trump had no intention of following through with the U.S.'s commitments under this very vague agreement. And I'm guessing part of that is because he got a lot of pushback from Republicans, particularly neocons, about the MOU and the Israel First group. They were furious. They were furious about this. And I think Israel was too. I don't believe Israel supported this. So, but I want to again go back to Iraq because I think, some trouble brewing in Iraq, and I don't hear anybody talking about that. Um, so we've got the prime minister who is planning on going after the militias. Now, the militias represent a large population, and I think before I say that, so Iran is a Shia Muslim, and 65% of the Iraqi population is also Shia. And I've never really understood the whole conflict between the Sunnis and the Shias, but it exists. I can't tell you much about it. I'm certainly no expert, but I think the population is about 45 million. So the estimate is, let's see, whatever. Um, there's a lot. There's a lot of Shia in Iraq, and so one of the militia groups. It's kind of hard to get information about it. I don't. I think they do their best to try to estimate how many members there are. But one of the groups is called the Popular Mobilization Force, PMF, is the acronym. And they are estimated to have 100,000 to 150,000 active members. And that's just one of the militia groups. The actual Iraqi military only has, I mean, let's see how many they have. The Iraqi army has 150,000 to 180,000 active soldiers. So the militias that may be Iran backed and or Iran aligned are as big as the army. I think the prime minister's efforts to try to disarm the militias, and the focus is on the Iranian-backed militias, could cause a big problem within Iraq. And that's what concerns me. Some analysts, they say they are concerned about this. They don't think it'll rise to the level of a civil war, but I think, to me, I mean, just looking at the events, it's going to depend on how aggressive the prime minister is. And he's being pushed by Trump to do this. And probably the GCC, but although I don't know that the GCC countries have that much influence over Iraq. Trump does, and the reason he does, and I did not know this. Again, I have not followed anything in Iraq for years. Although I do remember a few years ago, I was like, why do we still have a base there? Because I was just assuming we returned democracy, right, to Iraq. And, we got rid of that bad Saddam Hussein, and now we turned their government back over to the people. Well, yeah, apparently we haven't. And this was evident when I guess it's the parliament, maybe the Iraqi parliament, tried to choose a particular prime minister, and Trump threatened them with withholding their funds. I'll get to that. If they elected this guy. And he picked the current prime minister. I think his name is Zayadi. And I'm thinking, well, what do you mean withhold his funds? So I had to look into that. So apparently, I did not know this. All the money that Iraq gets for its oil contracts, goes into the Federal Reserve. And basically, the US approves the money going back to Iran. I mean, going back to Iraq. So the United States can withhold that money if Iraq government doesn't do what it wants. And that's exactly what Trump threatened. Apparently, this has been the situation for a very long time, but no president has so overtly and publicly threatened the Iraqi government. So it's clear to me Iraq does not have democracy and that the United States wants to control its oil. And those contracts, interestingly enough, no big surprise, have to be in dollars. So it supports the petrodollar. Am I surprised? Yeah, I actually was. I just didn't know this. I really assumed, they said they wanted to get rid of that evil Saddam Hussein and that was it. But no, really what they wanted was the oil. Because I guess he was probably getting in the way of them exploiting the oil. Because he used to work for the United States. I mean, I think he was a CIA asset way back in the day before I guess he decided his country was going to be sovereign. And there you go. That's what happens. Happened to Venezuela, happened to Libya. So right now, I guess the bottom line is Iraq does not have a democracy, and the U.S. is still controlling it. And I don't know. I think it's concerning. I do. The U.S. apparently is pulling out, or closing down its bases and everything but the Kurdistan region. So they're not going to be there to stop any or to help out, squash the population. But I don't know. I'm just concerned with what could happen in Iraq to the people. I'm concerned for the people. I don't, I think what we did to them was horrific. And, I just want them to have peace. The other thing, which can't be overlooked, is that they had funeral processions, I guess is what you call them, for the late Ayatollah, assassinated Ayatollah in Iraq last week, I guess it was. And they had an estimate of 10 million Shia people in the streets or participating in those events, which is a lot. So there really, you know, there really could be an uprising in Iraq. Uh, so I'm just going to keep an eye on that, and I wanted to raise that because I don't hear anybody talking about that or this possibility. And I think again, it'll be interesting to see what comes out of the statement. I'm assuming Trump and the Prime Minister of Iraq will, I don't know, maybe have a joint statement. The Prime Minister has framed this meeting with the United States as more of an economic partnership to improve their economic relations and partnerships, probably so the United States can exploit more of its oil. Who knows? I don't know. Iraq is a member of OPEC, so I think there are limits on how much they can produce. I also believe their oil comes out of the Strait or out of the Gulf and through the Strait of Hormuz. And I'm curious to see if Iran has allowed their ships to go through. The night of the Green Zone raid, I think the foreign minister, Arachi, is that his name? Arachi? From Iran was actually flew in to Iraq. And so I thought they were going to try to grab him, but they did not, thank God. Apparently he was there to talk about the funeral procession arrangements for that. So he got out safe. But anyway, I would just say keep an eye out on Iraq and see what happens. As of this new wave of fighting, if you will, bombing between the US and Iran, I don't believe the Iraqi militias have gotten involved. They have in the past. They've bombed or droned or whatever they did U.S. bases in Iraq. It's my understanding they have not done that to date. I don't even think they've struck anything in Kurdistan, although Iran has the U.S. base, I believe, in Kurdistan. But I don't believe the Iraq militia has gotten involved at all. And I think Lebanon, I think Hezbollah is pretty quiet. And I don't know how active the conflict is between the Houthis and Saudi Arabia. I'm not really sure, but I haven't really kept up with that or researched that. So anyway, so that's all I want to talk about on this topic. And we'll see what happens. God bless Iraq. I just hope that they have peace. They deserve it after everything the United States put them through with the Iraqi war. And so I think that's it on the topic of the Iran conflict and Iran's proxies. So thanks for listening.